Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. The stars blurred into streaks of light as Captain Michael Hargrave's shuttle cut through the vacuum of space, bound for a routine cargo run to the farthest reaches of the galactic outpost. Nothing about this mission had seemed unusual. The cargo was mundane, the space lanes quiet. But as Hargrave maneuvered his ship into the scheduled hyperspace jump, an anomaly flickered across his display. The console hummed with a strange frequency, one that Hargrave had never encountered. His hands flew over the controls, attempting to stabilize the ship's course. But before he could react, the navigation system malfunctioned, his ship was pulled off course by an unseen force. Great. Just great, Hargrave muttered under his breath as the stars twisted around him in an impossible spiral. His ship lurched forward, far off the mapped routes, until the eerie hum from the system subsided, leaving only silence. Then, a massive silhouette appeared in his view, a ship unlike any Hargrave had ever seen. It was sleek, black as the void, and impossibly massive. Its structure was a strange combination of smooth curves and sharp, jagged edges that seemed to pulse with a strange, red glow. It was a ship forged by ancient hands, a design that had no place in this age of spacefaring civilizations. Before Hargrave could react, a strange energy beam shot out from the ship, locking onto his shuttle. A series of mechanical clunks echoed through the hull, and his craft was slowly pulled toward the docking bay of the alien vessel, an invisible force guiding him like a toy. As his ship's thrusters powered down, Hargrave was left in a stunned silence. He checked his readouts, trying to comprehend what was happening. There was no sign of hostile intent, no incoming weapons fire, no signs of aggression. Yet, the situation felt far from safe. A voice, smooth and seductive, crackled over the comm system, sending an involuntary shiver down Hargrave's spine. "Welcome aboard, Captain Hargrave," it purred in a language that seemed to seep into his mind, bypassing all the usual translators. "I trust you will find your stay intriguing." His heart skipped a beat as the words settled in his mind. It was not the voice of an alien diplomat or a regular space pirate, it was something darker. Much darker. He had no idea where he was, nor how to escape. The unknown ship's sudden appearance, coupled with the way his own shuttle was forced into its dock, all but confirmed that this was no coincidence. "Who are you?" Hargrave demanded, his voice steady but betraying his unease. The voice lingered in the air, answering with a slow, deliberate calm. "You may call me Seraphine. I have special plans for you, Captain. Plans you will come to appreciate, if you survive them." Before Hargrave could respond, the docking bay door opened with a hiss, and a long, slender figure stepped into the airlock. The woman who entered was tall, impossibly graceful, with skin as pale as the moon and eyes that gleamed like twin rubies in the low light. Her presence filled the room with an aura of unearthly power, and Hargrave instinctively stepped back, unsure whether to draw his sidearm or run. The woman smiled, revealing long, sharp fangs. Her lips parted to speak, but there was a predatory grace to her every movement that sent an involuntary thrill down his spine. She was a creature of beauty, yes, but one that radiated danger in every fiber of her being. "Come," she said softly, her voice rich with a melody that pulled him forward against his will. "I promise, you'll find this difficult to resist." Hargrave's mind raced, his survival instincts kicking in. Vampires. The legends were true. But they were supposed to be myth, fiction for the hollow-eyed masses to devour. He had seen strange things in his years as a space captain, but nothing like this. "Where am I?" Hargrave demanded again, this time more forcefully. His gaze shifted to the exit, but the sleek doors slid shut with an audible thrum. Escape was impossible. Seraphine's smile deepened. "In my ship, of course. You're my guest now. No need to worry. You're safe, for now." She gestured to the rest of the ship, the dark corridors stretching off into the unknown. The ship is full of wonders. I've brought you here for a reason, Michael. Hargrave hesitated. He had no choice but to follow, but his mind was already working on an escape plan. There was something incredibly wrong with this situation, an alien vampire who had captured him and was calling him her guest. But the impulse to move toward her, the allure in her voice, was hard to ignore. It was as if his very thoughts were being influenced, twisting into something darker. The woman moved ahead with fluid elegance, and Hargrave found himself following her against his better judgment. The corridors of the ship were silent but pulsed with a faint red light, the walls seemingly alive with energy. The air was thick, almost metallic, with a strange scent that made his senses tingle. His every step felt as though he was being drawn into her web, and no matter how much he tried to resist, he could not break free. You must be wondering why I brought you here, Seraphine continued, her voice like velvet wrapped in ice. You see, Captain, I find humans to be fascinating. You are so fragile, yet so strong. So full of potential, and so easily manipulated. I could easily drain you of your blood, but that would be too simple, wouldn't it? Hargrave clenched his fists. He was not some lab rat for her amusement. He had been trained for moments like this, situations where his survival would be tested. And survive he would. But as the vampire's gaze met his, he felt an uncomfortable shudder run through him. There was something different about Seraphine. Something beyond the primal instincts of a vampire. She was far more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. And now, he was her captive. Captain Michael Hargrave's mind raced as he followed Seraphine through the dimly lit corridors of her strange, alien ship. Every instinct he had screamed at him to run, to fight, to break free of her control. Yet, with each step, he felt as though he were being drawn deeper into her web, a web that pulsed with an unsettling energy, an energy that seemed to vibrate through his very bones. The ship was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was alive in a way that defied reason, the walls humming with an almost organic warmth. The soft red glow of the lights cast eerie shadows that stretched across the metallic surfaces, making every corner feel like an unknown abyss. He had been on plenty of alien vessels before, but none had ever felt this, personal. Where are we going? Hargrave demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. His grip on his blaster tightened, but he knew better than to draw it yet. This wasn't a fight he could win with brute force, not yet. He had to understand the rules of this strange game, or he'd be lost before he even began. Seraphine glanced over her shoulder, her eyes gleaming with amusement. Patience, Captain. All in good time. For now, you need to understand something. Her voice was smooth, almost coaxing, but there was an undeniable undercurrent of power that made it impossible to ignore. You are mine now. For as long as you wish to remain. I brought you here not for your blood, but for something more, exquisite. Hargrave felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard rumors of alien creatures, vampires, they were called, who drained not just the life force of their prey, but their very essence. These beings, they didn't just kill. They took something intangible, something that left their victims hollowed out, empty. I don't belong to you, Hargrave growled, his chest tightening with a mix of anger and fear. I'm not some prisoner for your twisted games. Let me go. Seraphine stopped abruptly, and Hargrave nearly collided with her. She turned slowly, her ruby eyes locking onto his with a predatory gleam that made his heart skip a beat. You don't understand, do you? She said, her voice lowering, becoming more intimate, more dangerous. This ship, my people, my species, we do not simply capture humans. You were chosen, Michael. Chosen for something far greater than just being a plaything. Hargrave's pulse quickened as he tried to maintain his composure. Chosen? By who? Seraphine's lips curled into a faint smile. By me, of course. By my nature. You see, humans, fragile, fleeting things, are both fascinating and frustrating. You possess so much potential, so much spirit. It makes you irresistible. She stepped closer, her fingers grazing his arm in a touch that was both tender and cold. But you are also weak. Your bodies, your minds, so easily broken, so fragile. You run on adrenaline, on fear. It makes you exciting. But it also makes you vulnerable. Hargrave fought to keep his composure, even as her touch sent a jolt through him. What do you want from me? He demanded. Seraphine's smile deepened, her eyes gleaming in the dim light. I want you to understand your place in all this. I have brought you aboard not to kill you, but to transform you. The words hung in the air, and Hargrave's stomach twisted. He was no fool, he had fought through countless dangers in his career, from hostile alien worlds to treacherous space pirates. But this? This was something else. This was a power beyond anything he had ever encountered. He had seen the strength of the human spirit, the resilience of his species, time and again. But this alien vampire, she was something different. He took a step back, trying to distance himself from her aura. What are you saying? You're going to turn me into one of your kind? Seraphine's eyes glinted with something that might have been amusement, or was it hunger? Not turn you, no. I would never sully you with that curse. But I want to awaken you, Michael. To unlock the hidden potential within you. Hargrave shook his head, refusing to believe it. You're insane. I'm not your experiment. Her laughter was low, almost musical. You misunderstand, Captain. This is no experiment. This is destiny. You see, you have something that I need. Something that I've been searching for centuries. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice more urgent now, more desperate. What do you need from me? Seraphine's gaze softened, and she tilted her head in that unnerving way, as though she were studying him, calculating him. I am not just a vampire. I am an ancient being, one who has lived longer than most can comprehend. My people are dying, Michael. Slowly, but surely. The blood we once thrived on no longer sustains us. The power we once held is fading. And we cannot reproduce, not in the way you understand it. But there is hope, hidden deep within your species. The pieces began to fall into place. Hargrave's mind raced. She wasn't just playing games. She was desperate. Desperate to harness something she believed humans possessed. Something biological. But what? No, Hargrave said, his voice low and resolute. I won't be part of this. Seraphine stepped forward again, her presence suffocating, her gaze locking him in place. You have no choice, Michael. You will come to understand in time. You're already a part of this, whether you realize it or not. It's written in your blood. Hargrave's heart pounded in his chest. There was a truth in her words, something he couldn't fully grasp, but something deep inside him told him that she wasn't lying. He was already tangled in her schemes. But what was this blood she spoke of? What did he possess that was so vital to her kind? I'll escape, he muttered to himself, more for reassurance than anything else. Seraphine's smile returned, but this time, there was no warmth in it. Escape? You may try, Captain. But once you've tasted the power of what I offer, you won't want to leave. Before he could respond, a sharp, cold pain shot through his head, like a million needles piercing his skull. He gasped, clutching his temples, his vision spinning. It wasn't just pain. It was a wave of something unnatural. Her voice, now an echo in his mind, washed over him like a drug, curling through his thoughts. You belong to me now, she whispered in his ear, though her lips never moved. And I will make you understand your true power. The pain faded as quickly as it had come, but Hargrave was left trembling. The world around him seemed distorted, as if his very senses had been altered. He could feel her presence like a weight pressing down on him. Seraphine's laugh echoed through the hall. Welcome to your new reality, Captain. You will never be the same again. Hargrave didn't know how long he stood there, reeling from the strange sensation, his mind in turmoil. But one thing was certain, he had to find a way out, before he lost everything that made him human. Hargrave's pulse hammered in his ears as he stumbled away from Seraphine. The lingering aftershocks of the alien vampire's mental intrusion still clouded his thoughts, a fog that muddled his clarity and twisted his senses. His body felt foreign, too light, too heavy all at once, as though her touch had left some intangible mark on him, something that wouldn't wash away so easily. Seraphine observed him with an unreadable expression, the faintest of smiles tugging at the corner of her lips. You're not the first human I've captured, Michael. And you won't be the last. But you are different. Her voice slid over him like silk, caressing and suffocating at the same time. You will understand, eventually. The power I offer. The gift I give. Hargrave didn't answer. His mouth felt dry, his mind battling against the urge to fall into her rhythm, to listen to her every word, as if her very presence wrapped around him like an invisible force. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to focus on the sharp reality of the situation. He was a prisoner. A human trapped aboard a vampire's ship, with no clear way out. Stop, he growled, his voice low and strained. I don't want your gift. I don't want anything from you. Seraphine's eyes flickered with an emotion Hargrave couldn't quite identify, but it was not anger. She stepped forward slowly, almost languidly, as if every movement was choreographed, deliberate. He instinctively took a step back, but there was no escape, no corner to hide in. You're still so sure of yourself, so resistant. It's charming. You don't yet realize what you're up against. She paused, her gaze narrowing, as if reading his every thought. But your resistance will fade. All humans are weak in the end, Michael. You'll see. Hargrave's hand tightened around the grip of his blaster, but he didn't draw it. He had already learned that drawing weapons wouldn't help him here. His body still ached with the residual effects of her power, her mental influence, and that was something a blaster could never combat. Tell me what you want with me, he demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. Why me? What makes me different from the rest of your guests? Seraphine's smile deepened, a predatory gleam in her eyes. I told you. You have potential. A potential that I cannot waste. Not when there are so few like you. Her words rang with a strange kind of finality, but they didn't make sense. Hargrave had been a soldier, a captain, a man who had fought on countless worlds, but this was beyond his understanding. He had seen alien species of every kind, from the insectoid to the ethereal, but none were like this. None had this same predatory allure. What's so special about humans? He asked, his voice breaking with frustration. You said yourself, humans are weak, fragile. Why would anyone want to take a human as a guest? Seraphine's laughter was soft, almost wistful. Weak? Perhaps. But also, stronger than you know. In ways that even we, vampires, cannot fully comprehend. She took a step closer, her voice dropping into a whisper. You see, Michael, it's not the body that matters. It's the spirit. The will. The hunger that drives you forward, no matter the odds. Your kind has endured through war, famine, the darkest of times. You adapt. You evolve. You never give up. Hargrave's breath caught in his throat as her words pierced through him. He had always known humans were resilient, had seen their determination in the face of impossible odds. But to hear it from her, this alien being who seemed so far beyond human, made it feel different. Seraphine watched him closely, her gaze like a probe, reading him. Your kind survives by embracing your hunger, your desire for more. But that hunger comes with a price. Your price, Michael. I am offering you something that will allow you to harness it, to make it into a strength, one that no human has ever experienced before. Hargrave recoiled at the implication. "You want to make me like you," he muttered, shaking his head. "No. I will never be one of you." She smiled, not with triumph, but with a quiet understanding. "No, Michael. Not one of me. You will not become a vampire. You will become something new. Something far more powerful than you could ever imagine." The idea of becoming something beyond human, a being with unfathomable power, and eternal life, was tempting. Hargrave hated himself for even considering it. His humanity was everything to him. It defined him. Without it, what was left? "I don't need your gift," he spat, his voice hard. "I'll find a way out of here." Seraphine seemed unfazed by his defiance. "You'll try. But deep down, you know the truth, don't you, Captain? You know that escaping isn't the answer. You know that your kind is on the edge of extinction. You know how fragile your life is." Her voice softened, almost tender. "Wouldn't you want more? Wouldn't you want to live, forever?" The weight of her words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Hargrave's resolve wavered. The thought of an endless life, of never growing old, of having the power to reshape the universe itself, it was a heady promise. But it was a lie, wasn't it? It had to be. The sensation of her presence, like a heavy weight pressing down on him, was growing unbearable. His thoughts felt clouded, his instincts tangled with the need to break free of her influence. He couldn't trust her, not now, not ever. "Stop," he shouted, shaking his head, trying to clear the fog that clung to his mind. "You won't control me." Seraphine's smile faded slightly, but there was no anger in her expression. Only pity. "You'll learn soon enough, Michael. You'll come to understand that I'm offering you the only path forward." She reached out, her fingers brushing against his arm once more, her touch cold and soothing, like death itself. "You're afraid. Afraid of what I am, of what I can offer you. But once you accept it, you will never feel fear again. You will never want for anything." The words rang in his ears, but his heart beat with defiance. "No." Seraphine's expression softened, but there was something final in her eyes. "You are a fool, Captain. But I will wait. I will give you time. Time to accept your fate. Time to realize that what you fear most is what you crave the most." She stepped back, and with a flick of her wrist, the room seemed to shift, the walls folding inward as though they were part of some great living organism. The doors to the hallway slid open, revealing the vast, endless corridors of her ship. Hargrave stood, tense, as she turned to leave. Before she disappeared around the corner, she spoke one last time. "I won't force you, Michael. But you will come to me in time. All humans do." And with that, she was gone, leaving Hargrave alone in the silence of the ship. But he was not alone. Not really. Her presence lingered in his mind, in his soul, like a weight he couldn't escape. And deep down, he felt it, the faintest stir of temptation. The ship was vast, its hulls twisting and turning like some kind of organic maze. Hargrave had no sense of direction anymore. He wandered aimlessly for hours, trying to shake off the oppressive feeling that weighed on his chest. He couldn't stop thinking about Seraphine, her words, her touch, the eerie allure in her voice. It wasn't just her beauty that unsettled him, though that was a part of it. No, it was the way she had planted seeds of doubt in his mind, the way she had made him question his very nature. What if she's right? The thought wormed its way into his mind, just as it had before. He pushed it away immediately, furious at himself for even considering it. "No," he told himself, clenching his fists. "I'm human. I'm not like her." The corridors seemed endless, stretching into the unknown, but the deeper Hargrave went, the more the ship began to feel alive. The walls pulsed with a strange energy, an undercurrent that made his skin crawl. It was as if the ship itself was watching him, listening to his every step. His breaths grew shallow as the growing sensation of being pursued, hunted, became overwhelming. He was being drawn somewhere, though he couldn't tell where, or why. Finally, his senses caught something not unlike the pull of Seraphine's presence, but this time, it was different. Fainter, but unmistakably real. He followed it down a series of winding corridors, the pulse in his chest quickening. He was drawn to it, like a moth to flame, and yet, he resisted with all his strength. Stay focused. Find a way out. Don't get trapped in her games. But the closer he got, the harder it became to resist. His thoughts began to blur. The ship was playing tricks on him, whispering promises he knew he should never entertain. He had to escape. Escape from this maddening place and never look back. But then he reached the door. It stood before him, an ancient, obsidian-black archway, carved with strange symbols and runes. It didn't feel like part of the ship, it felt like a doorway to something far darker, far older. And yet, something about it called to him. His hand trembled as he placed it on the door's surface. A jolt of energy ran through him, cold and electric, making his entire body seize. A voice, her voice, echoed in his mind, soft and sweet, like honey laced with poison. You came. I knew you would. Hargrave's heart skipped a beat. His grip tightened on the doorframe, but his mind began to cloud, as though her words were seeping into his very thoughts. He shook his head, trying to break free, but it was impossible. The pull was too strong. You're hungry, aren't you? Seraphine's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through his consciousness with razor-sharp precision. You've been fighting it, Michael. But deep down, you know. You feel it, don't you? That hunger, it's inside you. His stomach churned with a deep, gnawing emptiness. His body ached in a way it never had before. The hunger, that hunger, had been with him ever since Seraphine had touched his mind. It wasn't the kind of hunger that could be satisfied with food or drink. No. This was a deeper, darker craving. A craving that gnawed at him from the inside, urging him to give in. He stumbled backward, his vision blurred. He had to get away. Get away, but no matter how far he ran, it followed him. That hunger. That pull. Fight it, he whispered to himself, his voice cracking. Fight it. But the words felt hollow. They couldn't stave off the growing need, the desperate urge to feed. The idea, the concept, was absurd. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't like her. But that didn't stop the way his mind twisted, his body yearning for something he couldn't quite name. He felt like he was on the edge of losing control, teetering between his human side and something else, something alien. The door in front of him slid open, slowly, as if it had been waiting for him all along. Beyond the threshold was a room that seemed to defy reality itself. The walls shimmered with an otherworldly glow, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to move on their own. At the center of the room stood a raised platform, bathed in soft, pulsing red light. And there, on the platform, lay a crystal-like structure, its surface shifting as if alive, its colors swirling with a strange and intoxicating energy. This is where it begins, Seraphine's voice said again, and this time, it wasn't in his mind, it was in the room itself. She had appeared before him, standing in the shadows, her pale figure almost blending into the darkness. Her eyes were full of something that could only be described as hunger, but it wasn't for blood. No, Hargrave whispered, stepping back. This isn't me. I won't. She took a step forward, and the room seemed to close in on him. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, time itself seemed to stop. His body froze, as though his mind could no longer control it. She's here again, pushing me. You've already begun, Seraphine said, her voice soft, almost tender. You just don't realize it yet. The hunger isn't something I gave you, Michael. It's something that's always been inside you. It's your nature. No, Hargrave shook his head, the words barely escaping his lips. I'm not like you. Her smile was sharp, like the blade of a knife. That's where you're wrong. You've always been like me. And now, you'll understand. She moved closer, and this time, Hargrave didn't fight it. He couldn't. Every instinct told him to step away, to push her back, but the hunger had taken root inside him. It whispered to him. It promised him power. Immortality. All he had to do was give in. The air between them crackled with energy, and Hargrave felt himself drawn into her orbit. Her fingers brushed against his cheek, cold as ice. Come closer, she whispered. Let it in. Let me show you what you're capable of. His breath came in shallow gasps. The room seemed to grow darker, the red light intensifying, drawing him in like a magnetic pull. He felt his body respond, his senses overwhelmed. Her power, her presence, it was everywhere. His blood burned in his veins, and for the first time, he understood what she had meant. The hunger was real. It was his. And it had always been there. Seraphine's smile widened, and her fangs gleamed. You're mine now, Michael. Forever. But in the depths of his mind, a flicker of resistance remained. He wasn't ready to give in. Not yet. Hargrave took a step back, forcing himself to break free from her influence. The hunger was still there, gnawing at him, but he fought it. He had to fight it. You're wrong, he spat, his voice trembling. I'm not like you. Seraphine's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a smile that sent a chill down his spine. We'll see, Captain. We'll see. She stepped back into the shadows, vanishing once more into the darkness of the ship. Hargrave stood there, trembling. The hunger gnawed at him, but he wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. He wasn't ready to let go of who he was. But the ship, Seraphine, they wouldn't let him go. Not until they had consumed him completely. Hargrave woke in a cold sweat, his breath ragged as he shot up from the bed, the strange sensations still echoing in his body. His head throbbed, a dull ache that seemed to pulse with every beat of his heart. The hunger. It gnawed at him, deeper now, as if something inside him had been awakened that he couldn't control. The room he found himself in was dimly lit, the walls pulsating with a soft, red glow, an unsettling reminder of Seraphine's influence. He was on the ship again, but the nature of his surroundings had changed. The sterile, metallic confines of the hallways were gone, replaced by plush, opulent furniture and rich tapestries that adorned the walls. The air smelled faintly of incense, something exotic and intoxicating. The deeper he inhaled, the more it seemed to draw him in, like it was meant to cloud his judgment. He felt different now. Weak, but also, stronger. The hunger surged again, sharp and insistent. His hands trembled as he pressed them to his face, trying to regain control of himself. Stay focused, Hargrave. Stay human. But his thoughts were already slipping. The pull of Seraphine's voice echoed in his mind. Come closer. He had to get away. The realization came slowly, but with clarity, he had to stop her. He had to stop himself before he succumbed completely to her influence. The thought of becoming like her, the promise of immortality, of endless power, it had been tempting, but now it was a nightmare he could barely shake off. A soft sound broke through his thoughts, a whisper in the air. It was Seraphine's voice, but this time, there was no illusion of distance. She was here. He could feel her presence before he even saw her. You're awake, she said, her voice silky, calm, like she was discussing something mundane. I was hoping you would be. Hargrave looked up, his eyes narrowing. Seraphine stood at the entrance to the room, her figure framed by the dim light. She was as breathtaking as ever, no, more so. There was a predatory grace to her movements, a fluidity that was almost unnatural. But it wasn't her beauty that drew him in. It was the power that radiated from her, the aura that made the very air around them feel charged. "You again," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "I thought I told you." "You told me many things, Michael," she interrupted, stepping into the room, her eyes locked onto him with a knowing gaze. "But your words are nothing compared to your actions." He felt his muscles tense, but his mind was foggy, tangled with conflicting thoughts. His pulse quickened as he stood up, backing away from her, but his body felt heavy, as though the gravity itself had increased. The hunger surged again, stronger this time, clawing at his insides. "I'm not like you," he gritted, though the words felt hollow. Seraphine smiled, a slow, calculated curve of her lips. "That's what you keep telling yourself. But the truth is, Michael, you are already changing. Can't you feel it?" He pressed his hands to his temples, trying to block her out, but her presence was overwhelming, suffocating. "I won't give in to you," he spat, though his words were shaky. "You already have," she said softly. "You just don't know it yet." Before he could respond, the room seemed to shift. The walls pulsed, the red light flickering as the air grew thick with tension. Hargrave's vision blurred, and the hunger, the need, roared within him, louder than before. His body was on fire. It was as though something was awakening in him, something ancient and primal. Seraphine stepped closer, her eyes locked on his with an intensity that could have burned through steel. "Look at you, Michael," she said, her voice gentle, almost coaxing. "The hunger is there. You're fighting it, but you can't win. Not against me. Not against yourself." "Shut up," he growled, but his voice was strained. His chest heaved as he struggled to keep control. Her gaze softened, almost sympathetically. "I can help you, Michael. I can make the hunger a strength, not a curse. Let me show you." "No," he gasped, though even as he said it, he felt the hesitation in his words. She was right, in a way. The hunger wasn't something new, it had always been there. The desire for more, the urge to push beyond the limits of his human form. He had always known humans were capable of great things, but was this what they had been capable of all along? Could he truly become something more than human? "You're afraid," Seraphine continued, her voice almost pitying. "Afraid of losing yourself. But what if I told you that you don't have to lose who you are? You don't have to become like me. You can be better. Stronger. Eternal." He didn't speak for a long moment. Her words slithered under his skin, around his thoughts, and he could feel himself weakening. His fingers twitched, the hunger pulsing at his core. His instincts told him to take it, to give in, to embrace the power, to embrace the immortality that would come with it. But that voice inside him, the one that had kept him human all this time, screamed for him to resist. "I won't be like you," Hargrave said again, his voice firmer this time, though his hands were shaking. Seraphine smiled again, her fangs just visible. "You're so stubborn. But I admire your will. It's one of the things that makes humans so fascinating." She took another step forward, so close now that he could feel her icy presence, her energy wrapping around him like a coil. "But I won't wait forever, Michael. You'll have to choose. Soon, very soon, this hunger will become unbearable, and then I will be the only one who can help you." Hargrave didn't respond. He couldn't. Every part of him was screaming for release. He needed something. Something to fill the emptiness inside him. But it wasn't her he wanted. It wasn't her power, her immortality, her gift. He just needed something else. His humanity. "I'm not like you," he said again, the words slipping past his lips, more to remind himself than anything else. He was human. He wasn't a vampire. He was a soldier, a captain. A protector of humanity. That was what he had to hold on to. Seraphine tilted her head, a bemused look on her face. "You'll change your mind, Michael. You will. She gave him one last, lingering glance, and with a slow, graceful movement, she stepped back, her figure fading into the shadows. "I'll be waiting," she said softly, as if the words themselves held a promise. Hargrave stood alone in the room, the hunger still clawing at him, but something inside him had shifted. His body screamed for release, for the power she offered, but his mind, his spirit, remained firm. He wasn't like her. He wasn't like the others who had given in. He had to find another way. Hargrave stood frozen for a long moment after Seraphine vanished into the shadows. The hunger gnawed at him relentlessly, but there was something else now. A strange clarity had settled over him, and with it, a renewed sense of resolve. He wasn't going to be like her. Not like the others who had fallen prey to her. He wasn't going to give in. His legs were trembling, but he forced himself to move. The ship felt even more alien than before, its walls pressing in on him, its halls a maze of strange, twisting corridors that led nowhere. He had been walking aimlessly for hours, his mind spinning in confusion. The hunger had taken root in him, deeper than anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't just a physical craving. It was a craving for power, for something more. And that terrified him. "If I'm not careful, I'll become just like her." He had to resist. He had to fight, no matter what it took. But even as he thought those words, his stomach clenched with desperation, the hunger growing ever stronger. There was no escape from it. No respite. But there was one thing he could do. The bridge. If he could get to the bridge, maybe he could figure out a way to gain control. Maybe there was a way to fight this alien force, this unnatural pull that seemed to control the ship. He had to reach it before it was too late. If he stayed here, the hunger would consume him, and Seraphine would win. And if that happened, the rest of humanity might never stand a chance. The air felt heavier as he moved through the ship, each step echoing in the silence. The pulse of the ship, that low hum that seemed to resonate beneath his feet, had grown more intense. It was as if the ship itself was aware of his presence, watching him, waiting for him to fall. He rounded another corner, his boots clanging against the metal floor. He didn't know how much time had passed. Hours? Days? It didn't matter. He had to find the bridge. Then, suddenly, the ship seemed to come alive. The lights flickered, casting shadows that stretched and danced along the walls. The temperature dropped, and a cold chill ran down his spine. He could hear whispers, low and guttural, weaving through the walls, scraping against his mind like nails on a chalkboard. His heart raced, each beat like a drum in his chest. The hunger was consuming him, filling his senses, making everything feel distant, unreal. The whispers grew louder, as though something, someone, was inside his mind. "Come to me, Michael." The voice. That voice. It was Seraphine. Hargrave shook his head, trying to block her out, but it was impossible. She was inside him now. Not just her voice, but her thoughts. Her influence. It was taking hold of him, twisting his very mind. His vision blurred, and the pulse of the ship grew louder, a rhythmic pounding that seemed to beat in time with his racing heart. No. I am not her. But even as he tried to resist, he felt the pull of her once more. The hunger was so much more than a need for food or blood. It was a primal urge for domination. A hunger that had been awakened in him by her. It wasn't just the hunger for power, it was a desire to be her, to become what she was. The walls seemed to pulse around him. The whispers became voices, distant, alien voices that seemed to surround him. He staggered, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He wanted to collapse. To give in. He was so close. So close to the edge. And then, suddenly, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He whipped around, his breath catching in his throat. It was Seraphine. "You don't need to fight, Michael," she said, her voice like velvet, her gaze burning into his soul. She was so close now, standing in the middle of the corridor, her presence overwhelming. The hunger is yours, you don't need to be afraid of it. You can be like me. Strong. Eternal. Hargrave swallowed hard, his chest heaving with each breath. The hunger surged within him, twisting and tearing at his insides. His teeth clenched as he tried to push it back, but her words were poison. They slithered into his mind, whispering promises he knew he shouldn't trust. You don't have to resist anymore, Michael, Seraphine continued, stepping closer. Her eyes never left his, and her voice was like a lullaby, coaxing him into submission. You can have everything you want. The power. The immortality. All of it is within your reach. All you have to do is accept it. Hargrave's body was on fire. His skin tingled with the electric pull of her presence, his muscles screaming for release. His blood boiled, his senses heightened to the point where every sound, every flicker of movement, felt amplified. He could feel the hunger in every fiber of his being. It was almost unbearable. But then, something inside him snapped. Something deep, something primal, that refused to bow to her. He could feel his humanity, the essence of what made him who he was, rising up, pushing back against the overwhelming darkness that threatened to consume him. No, he growled, his voice raw, filled with defiance. I'm not like you. I never will be. Seraphine's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. You still don't understand, do you? You can't fight this, Michael. You can't fight me. The hunger is in your blood. It's in your soul. You can't outrun it. I'm human, Hargrave spat. And I'll die a human. The walls of the ship seemed to close in around him, but Hargrave's resolve hardened. He wasn't going to give up. Not now, not ever. His hand brushed against the wall, and something sharp, pulsed beneath his fingers. A hidden panel. The control system for the ship. Seraphine watched him, her expression unreadable. She didn't move, not yet. Hargrave knew that if he didn't act now, it would be too late. He pushed the panel open, revealing a set of ancient controls, strange and alien, but familiar enough. He didn't understand how they worked, but he didn't need to. He just needed to disable the ship. Disconnect it from the influence it had over him. His fingers flew over the controls, his breath heavy in his chest. He could feel Seraphine's eyes on him, the weight of her presence pressing down on him like a vice. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. With a final, desperate push, he activated a sequence that would sever the link between the ship and his mind. There was a sharp, sudden jolt. The lights flickered and then went out completely, leaving Hargrave in complete darkness. He felt it. The hunger. It was still there, but now, it was distant. Faint. The grip Seraphine had on him loosened, if only for a moment. Did you think this would end with you, Michael? Her voice came again, cold and dangerous. Hargrave didn't respond. He knew this wasn't over. But for the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. The silence in the darkened corridor was suffocating. The sudden stillness after the jolt of the ship's systems shutting down left Hargrave breathless, disoriented, and unsure if he had succeeded. His hands trembled on the console, his fingers still pressed against the alien controls, trying to steady himself in the deep, cold void of the ship. But the hunger, it wasn't gone. It lingered, lurking at the edge of his consciousness, gnawing at his resolve like a constant reminder of Seraphine's power. She will not let you go. The thought echoed through his mind like a warning, but it wasn't Seraphine's voice. It was his own. His instincts, the remnants of his humanity, fighting against the encroaching darkness. Hargrave's eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, the faint red glow of the emergency lights casting an eerie hue on the walls around him. The ship felt different now. The low hum was gone, the oppressive energy that had filled the air seemed to dissipate with the failure of the ship's systems. It was as if the power that had held him in its thrall had momentarily been broken. But then the temperature dropped, and the walls felt like they were closing in. His breath came in sharp bursts, fogging the air before him. The hunger was still there, and Seraphine's presence seemed to grow even stronger in the silence, her influence wrapping around him, suffocating. He spun around, his eyes scanning the shadows. She's here. And then he saw her. Seraphine stood at the far end of the corridor, her silhouette framed by the faint red light. Her presence was unmistakable, a dark and alluring force that seemed to fill the room with her every movement. She stepped forward, her steps silent, gliding effortlessly toward him. Her gaze locked onto him, those piercing eyes glowing with an otherworldly intensity. "You think you've won?" she asked, her voice soft and mocking, but there was an edge to it, a deep frustration buried beneath the calm exterior. "You think you can run from what you are?" Hargrave's fists clenched, his body taut with tension. "I'm human," he growled, trying to steady his breath. "I won't be like you." Seraphine's lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "You say that now. But you've already tasted it, Michael. You felt the power surge through your veins, the hunger awakening within you. You can't undo that." Hargrave's heart pounded in his chest, but he stood his ground. He knew he was weak. He knew the hunger was still there, scratching at his insides, but there was a part of him, the part that had been trained to fight, the part that refused to submit, that wouldn't back down. "Not now. I won't be your monster," he said, his voice stronger this time. "And I'll never be like you." Seraphine tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You say you won't be like me, but you are like me. You're just too afraid to admit it." She took another step closer, her presence overwhelming, and Hargrave's legs shook beneath him. He could feel the pull of her power, drawing him in, beckoning him to succumb. The hunger roared again, sharper now, more desperate. His teeth clenched, and he fought to suppress it, to keep it locked away. "You have no idea what you're asking, do you?" she murmured, her voice a silken caress as she drew even closer, now within arm's reach. "The hunger, the power, it's not something you control, Michael. It controls you. And soon, you'll understand that." Hargrave's breath hitched. The pain of the hunger was almost unbearable now. His muscles burned with the need to feed, to break free of his human limitations. But there was still a thread of resistance within him. He couldn't let her win. He looked at her, straight into those eyes that seemed to burn with an unnatural fire. "I'm not afraid of what you can offer. I'm afraid of what I'll become if I give in to you." Seraphine studied him with a mix of amusement and disappointment. "You're so stubborn, Michael. So human." Her voice dropped to a low, dangerous whisper. "But I won't leave you alone until I have you. You'll see. You'll be mine, just like the others. You are mine." With a sudden, fluid motion, she lunged at him, faster than he could react. Her hands were around his throat before he could even raise his arm to defend himself, her fingers like ice as they tightened around his windpipe. The coldness of her touch seeped into his skin, and he gasped for breath, his vision starting to blur. The hunger screamed inside him, demanding that he give in, that he let go and become like her. It promised power, freedom, immortality. He fought. He fought with every ounce of strength he had left. His hands clawed at her grip, but it was like trying to move mountains. She was stronger than he had ever imagined. She was cold, relentless, an unstoppable force. But then, through the fog of his panic and the roaring hunger, something inside him clicked. His training, his experience as a soldier, kicked in. His instincts, his humanity, surged to the forefront. He reached up, gripping her wrists with all the strength he could muster. His body was shaking, but there was fire in his eyes as he twisted her arms, breaking her grip, and shoved her away from him. Seraphine stumbled back, surprised by his sudden burst of strength. Her eyes flashed with fury, but there was something else in them now. Respect. "You are stronger than I thought," she said, her voice tight with anger. But you still won't win, Michael. He was gasping for breath, his hands still trembling, but he stood tall. His mind was clearer now, focused. The hunger was still there, but it had lost its edge. It was no longer something he was running from. Now, it was something he was choosing to control. I don't need your power, he said, his voice firm, resolute. I don't need anything from you. Not anymore. Seraphine narrowed her eyes, and for a moment, there was a flicker of uncertainty in her gaze. You think you can fight me? You think you can resist forever? I won't fight you, Hargrave said, stepping forward. I'll defeat you. With that, he turned away from her, his steps sure and deliberate as he made his way toward the bridge once again. He was no longer running from the hunger. He had found a way to control it. Behind him, Seraphine watched, her fangs bared in silent rage. She did not speak. She did not move. Hargrave reached the bridge, his fingers steady as he activated the control system, locking Seraphine out of the ship's core systems. The lights flickered, and the ship's hum grew silent once again. He had done it. He had severed the last tether that held him to her. But as he stood there, alone in the quiet, his body still racked with the remnants of the hunger, he knew one thing for certain, this battle was far from over. Seraphine would return. But when she did, he would be ready. And this time, humanity would not fall. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.